Welcome to Walking the Torah Portions. I'm Tyler Merwin, and this is Torah Portion, SHOFTIM. This week's Torah portion is Deuteronomy 16:18 through 21:9. The Haftarah this week is Isaiah 51:12 through 52:12. SHOFTIM means judges. As in our opening line, it reads, "You shall appoint judges and officers in all your towns that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God is giving you, according to your tribes, and they shall judge the people with righteous judgment." Deuteronomy 16:18. This week's Torah portion continues in Deuteronomy 16. As we stated last week, the bulk of all the commandments in the book of Devarim are contained in last week's, this week's, and next week's Torah portions. The bulk of the commandments goes from chapter 12 all the way through chapter 26. Rabbi Foreman's team at Aleph Beta point out that these are not random selections of commandments put together, though it may seem like that on the surface when you're reading it. It begins with the opening of last week's Torah portion, Re'eh, that says, "See, I am setting before you today a blessing and a curse," which is Deuteronomy 11:26. The blessing is for obedience and the curse for disobedience. Verse 29 states, "And when Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God brings you into the land that you are entering to take possession of it, you shall set the blessing on Mount Gerizim and the curse on Mount Ebal." Deuteronomy 11:29. Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal are only referenced here just before going into the commandment chapters of 12 through 26. But after we finish these commandment chapters, chapter 27 gives us the detail on what's supposed to happen on Mount Gerizim, which is the mount of blessing, and on Mount Ebal, which is the mount of curse. So these three portions are laying out the details of what we are to be obedient to for the blessing. Moses felt the need to express these certain commandments to this new generation that was getting ready to cross the Jordan and inherit the promised land. Remember that all of the commandments are details and nuance of the actual 10 words given at Mount Sinai. So our portion begins by setting up a justice system with a court in every town, and we are warned about taking bribes. Chapter 17 opens with the prohibition of sacrificing an animal with a defect. God is not our local thrift store. He gets our best, not our leftovers or unwanted items. Verse 2 discusses someone who is found worshiping idols, and the penalty for this is death by stoning. And it goes on to say, "On the evidence of 2 witnesses or of 3 witnesses, the one who is to die shall be put to death. A person shall not be put to death on the evidence of 1 witness." Deuteronomy 17:6. The sages understand that the 2 or 3 witnesses, being that 2 is the absolute minimum, but all witnesses should be sought out and interviewed in court, even if there are many, especially if the punishment is the death penalty. In other words, we shouldn't stop at 2 or 3 witnesses if there are more out there. By hearing all of them, we will have the best information to make a proper judgment. Any case arises requiring decision between one kind of homicide and another, one kind of legal right and another, or one kind of assault and another, any case within your towns that is too difficult for you, then you shall arise and go up to the place that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God will choose. Deuteronomy 17:8. Just like when Moses appointed elders to help judge the people in the wilderness, but stated, "If a case is too hard for you, bring the case to me, and I will inquire of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh," so this same model persists. If an important case can't be decided in the local court, it is to be brought to the high court, the Sanhedrin, which would be operated near the tabernacle and later the temple. They will hear the case and render the final decision, according to the instructions that they give you, and according to the decision which they pronounce to you, you shall do. You shall not turn aside from the verdict that they declare to you. either to the right hand or to the left. Deuteronomy 17:11. Now the next verse seems pretty harsh out of context. The man who acts presumptuously by not obeying the priest who stands to minister there before Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God, or the judge, that man shall die. You shall purge the evil from Israel. Deuteronomy 17:12. This is actually understood by the sages to be in reference to a rebellious elder. So this is an elder or a sage, that's someone who's recognized and in leadership within the community, who is qualified to sit on the Sanhedrin, but who is defying the decisions made by the high court. This is not one who is simply rendering his own different opinion. This is someone who's advocating defying the court itself. When you come to the land that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are around me. You may indeed set a king over you, whom Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you, who is not your brother. Deuteronomy 17:14 and 15. Moses foresees that there will be a king over Israel, and here he lists the requirements for a king. God will choose the king, and he can't be a foreigner. Verses 16 and 17 prohibit acquiring many horses or many wives or an excess of gold and silver. All of these things which King Solomon, King Shlomo, actually did. It's understood that a king would have horses and would have wives and would have gold and would have silver. But unlike worldly kings, they would be kept down to a level of need, whereas worldly kings themselves would amass as much as they possibly could as a show of power and prestige. And when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law, approved by the Levitical priests, and it shall be with him, and he shall read in it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes, and doing them. And his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment, either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. Deuteronomy 17:18 through 20. The king is but a servant of God, and the Torah is meant to keep him humble. After talking about kings, chapter 18 goes on to cover some of the provisions for the priests and the Levites. Since they are not given an inheritance and have the duty to minister to God in their tabernacle or temple and teach Torah to the people, certain portions of the people's offerings are reserved for them as their provision. There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination, or tells fortunes, or interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or a charmer, or a medium, or a necromancer, or one who inquires of the dead. For whoever does these things is an abomination to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. And because of these abominations, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God is driving them out from before you. Deuteronomy 18:10 through 12. So fortune tellers, tarot card readers, and the like are forbidden for God's people. God gives us His Word and His prophets to help us understand the future, not through divination. Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your brothers. It is to him you shall listen. Deuteronomy 18:15. At the end of chapter 18, Moses tells them about a prophet that God will raise up like Moses. Even though this does refer to prophets that God will raise up in Israel, this is prophesying about the Messiah. There was a great messianic expectation in the first century, and they were looking for the prophet spoken of here. And this is the testimony of John, when the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, "Who are you?" He confessed and did not deny, but confessed, "I am not the Christ." And they asked him, "What then? Are you Elijah?" He said, I am not. Are you the prophet? And he answered, No. John 1:19-21. Seeing the mighty works of the Spirit in John the Baptist, the sages of that time asked him if he potentially is the prophet spoken of in our portion. After Yeshua's resurrection, his disciples refer to him directly as the prophet. You can see this twice, one where Peter is preaching at the temple in Acts 3:22, and a second time when Stephen is martyred, and in his speech, which is recorded in Acts 7:37. And here's more about the prophet from our portion. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. And whoever will not listen to my words, that he shall speak in my name, I myself will require it of him. Deuteronomy 18:18 and 19. What was one of Yeshua's repeatable phrases? I only speak the words of my Father. Moses warns us here that we need to shema. Remember, shema is to hear with the intent to obey our Messiah, Yeshua. The chapter ends with the death penalty for a false prophet. Chapter 19 begins with the cities of refuge for the manslayer. 3 cities of refuge were already set up Transjordan. Verse 2 speaks of the 3 cities of refuge that were to be set up in the land after they inhabit it. They are to be equally spaced, so they are not too far for the manslayer to flee. The sages also say that there was to be good signage in the land, directing you to the nearest city of refuge, and that the roads that would take you there would be kept in good repair. It's interesting that the word used for murderer and manslayer are the same Hebrew word. A manslayer is basically a murderer, but without the intent. But it is taking an innocent life prematurely. Context is how we would distinguish between these terms in the actual Hebrew. And if Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, enlarges your territory, as he has sworn to your fathers, and gives you all the land that he promised to give to your fathers, provided you are careful to keep all of this commandment, which I command you today, by loving Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, and by walking ever in his ways, then you shall add 3 other cities to these 3. Deuteronomy 19:8 and 9. The sages see this as an additional expansion during the Messianic era. This would bring the total count of the cities of refuge to 9. You'd have 3 that were Transjordan, 3 originally in the land, and then 3 in the expanse. Verse 14 reminds us not to move property markers, as this is a type of theft. A single witness shall not suffice against a person for any crime or any wrong in connection with any offense that he has committed. Only on the evidence of 2 witnesses or of 3 witnesses shall a charge be established. Deuteronomy 19:15. All legal matters must have at least 2 witnesses. Moses tells us how to deal with a false witness. If a malicious witness arises to accuse a person of wrongdoing, then both parties to the dispute shall appear before Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, before the priests and the judges who are in office in those days. The judges shall inquire diligently. If the witness is a false witness and has accused his brother falsely, then you shall do to him as he had meant to do to his brother. You shall purge the evil from your midst. Deuteronomy 19:16 through 19. Incorporating this standard in our justice systems today could really cut down on frivolous lawsuits and a whole lot of corruption. When you go out to war against your enemies and see horses and chariots and an army larger than your own, you shall not be afraid of them. For Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, is with you, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Deuteronomy 20, verse 1. Chapter 20 deals with the laws concerning warfare. Before the battle, the war priest, or the priest anointed for war, was to encourage the troops and remind them that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God, goes out with you to fight against your enemies and to give you the victory. After the war priest encourages the troops, then the officers would address them and bring them 4 reasons to be excused from the battle. Then the officers shall speak to the people, saying, "Is there any man who has built a new house and has not dedicated it? Let him go back to his house, lest he die in the battle and another man dedicate it. And is there any man who has planted a vineyard and has not enjoyed its fruit? Let him go back to his house, lest he die in the battle and another man enjoy its fruit. And is there any man who has betrothed a wife and has not taken her or married her? Let him go back to his house, lest he die in the battle and another man take her." And the officers shall speak further to the people and say, "Is there any man who is fearful or faint-hearted? Let him go back to his house, lest he make the heart of his fellows melt like his own." Deuteronomy 20, 5-8. The last exemption seems to make logical sense, as extreme fear can be contagious and actually dangerous in battle, and can negatively affect the faith of those around him. But the first 3 do seem a bit odd. Rabbi Foreman has some great insight into this. The 3 cases all have begun something grand. They built a house, they planted a vineyard, or betrothed a wife. But all of these are unfinished. They're close, but no cigar. The significance of these 3 acts can point us back to the creation, before our fall into sin. God created the heavens and the earth. He built a dwelling place. So he built a house. God created and placed a garden on the earth, the Garden of Eden. He planted, just like planting a vineyard. And he created Adam. He created man. He created someone to commune with him, just like betrothing a wife. So these 3 acts should be completed as they show forth Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh's perfect plan, one that Yeshua died for. When you draw near to a city to fight against it, offer terms of peace to it, and if it responds to you peaceably and opens to you, then all of the people who are found in it shall do forced labor, and shall serve you. But if it makes no peace with you, but makes war against you, then you shall besiege it. Deuteronomy 20, 10-12. These rules are for future conquests, not for the taking of the promised land. This instead is for normal warfare. Verse 19 tells them, when besieging a city, not to cut down the fruit trees, but they can cut down trees that are not for food. Trees can be symbolic of people in Scripture. So a fruit tree is one who is bearing good fruit, the fruits of righteousness. But the tree that bears no fruit is to be cut down and thrown into the fire. Our portion ends this week in chapter 21, dealing with unsolved murder. If in the land that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh your God is giving you, to possess, someone is found slain, lying in the open country, and it is not known who killed him, your elders and your judges shall come out, and they shall measure the distance to the surrounding cities. Deuteronomy 21, 1-2. The elders of the nearest city to the slain man are to perform a ritual, because innocent blood pollutes the land, and it must be atoned for. They are to take a heifer that has never been worked and bring it to an undeveloped valley with a flowing stream. They are to break the heifer's neck. The priests are to come forward, and the elders are to wash their hands over the slain heifer. And they shall testify, our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it shed. Accept atonement, O Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, for your people Israel, whom you have redeemed, and do not set the guilt of innocent blood in our midst of your people Israel, so that their blood guilt be atoned for. Deuteronomy 21, 7-8. Our portion concludes with, you shall purge the guilt of innocent blood from your midst. when you do what is right in the sight of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Deuteronomy 21:9. The blood of the innocent cries out to our Father in heaven, the Redeemer of blood. Let us act as righteous judges in the situations that God has given us. We need to be faithful and true witnesses to His truth that is planted within us. And let us shema, that is to hear with the intent to obey, the prophet, like Moses, Yeshua HaMashiach. I pray this teaching has been edifying. Let's lift up the name of the Holy One with love in Echad. Shalom.